How do you hunt a monster you've never seen? When a killer leaves no fingerprints, no DNA, and no witnesses, how do you find them? You must go beyond the physical evidence and enter the most complex crime scene of all, the human mind. This is the story of how investigators learned to build a ghost, to create a portrait of a killer from the shadows they left behind. Our story unfolds across the sprawling metropolis of New York City, beginning in 1940. It wasn't a single, bloody crime scene, but a series of them, stretched out over 16 terrifying years. The perpetrator was a phantom, an urban legend known only as the Mad Bomber. His signature was not a weapon, but the meticulously crafted pipe bombs he left in public places, theaters, train stations, and libraries. The first bomb was found at the offices of the Consolidated Edison Power Company, a clue that would later become critical. It was a dud, accompanied by a note written in block letters, promising more to come. For years, the police treated the incidents as the work of a harmless crank. But as the bombs grew more sophisticated and began to injure innocent civilians, a chilling realization dawned. They were dealing with a patient, intelligent, and deeply angry individual. The investigation was a portrait of frustration. For over a decade, the NYPD had nothing. The bombs were untraceable, built from common materials. The crime scenes were crowded public spaces, wiped clean of any useful evidence. The bomber was a ghost in a city of millions, his only communication coming in the form of taunting letters sent to newspapers, filled with rage and a cryptic grudge against Con Ed. These letters were the only clues investigators had. They were written in a strange, precise block lettering, filled with paranoid ramblings about injustices he had suffered. He signed them FP, another piece of a puzzle with no picture on the box. He claimed he was being denied justice for injuries he sustained while working for the power company years earlier. The police were chasing a grievance, not a person. By the mid-1950s, the pressure on the NYPD was immense. The Mad Bomber had become a specter haunting the city, a symbol of fear and the police department's apparent incompetence. With all traditional investigative avenues exhausted, Inspector Howard Finney, head of the NYPD's bomb squad, decided to take a radical, unprecedented step. He decided to consult a psychiatrist. Dr. James Brussel was a criminologist and psychiatrist, a man who believed that a person's actions were a direct reflection of their personality. He theorized that even in the chaos of a crime, a criminal leaves behind traces of themselves, what he called a psychological fingerprint. He was asked to study the bomber's letters and the details of the crimes to see if he could paint a picture of the man behind them. This was the birth of what we now know as criminal profiling. Dr. Brussel sat not in an interrogation room, but in his office, surrounded by the bomber's strange letters and photos of his devices. He wasn't looking for physical clues. He was looking for patterns of thought, for the signature of a specific mental state. He began to dissect the bomber's mind, one paranoid sentence at a time. His analysis of the letters was profound. The precise, neat lettering suggested someone meticulous and orderly. The recurring theme of persecution and the belief that a powerful company was conspiring against him screamed of paranoia, likely paranoid schizophrenia. The language, which was formal and slightly stilted, suggested an immigrant from Central or Eastern Europe. Dr. Brussel delved deeper. The bombs themselves were skillfully made, not just destructive but almost artistic in their construction. This told him the man was a skilled mechanic, comfortable with tools, likely middle-aged or older, as his grudge stemmed from an event many years in the past. He predicted the man would be in his 40s or 50s. He saw an obsessive-compulsive nature in the bomber's methods. Everything was neat, clean, and according to a private, internal logic. From this, he made a startling leap. This neatness would be reflected in his personal life. He would be a man who kept a clean home, a man who was always well-groomed, even when no one was looking. The profile became shockingly specific. Dr. Brussel reasoned that a man this paranoid would likely be an outsider, someone who didn't socialize well. He would be unmarried and reclusive, probably living with a female relative, most likely an older sister or an aunt. He deduced this because the letters contained no phallic imagery, which he believed a man living alone would be more prone to include in his angry screeds. The police were stunned by the detail. Brussel wasn't just giving them a type, he was describing a specific human being. He told them the man would be a Slav, a Roman Catholic. He would live not in New York City, but in a nearby community in Connecticut, a state with a large population of Eastern European immigrants and a hub for Con Edison workers at the time. But Dr. Brussel saved his most theatrical and famous prediction for last. He looked at the assembled, skeptical police officers and said, "One more thing. When you catch him, and I have no doubt you will, he'll be wearing a double-breasted suit. And it will be buttoned." This was a detail born from his belief that the man's prim, proper, and old-fashioned nature would be reflected in his choice of clothing. The breakthrough was not a smoking gun, but the profile itself. Armed with this incredibly detailed portrait of their phantom, the police released it to the public through the city's newspapers. They hoped that someone somewhere would recognize this neat, middle-aged, paranoid Slavic mechanic with a grudge against Con Edison. They were asking the city to help them find a ghost. The gamble paid off. A clerk at Consolidated Edison read the profile, and it triggered a memory. She began combing through old, voluminous employee files, specifically looking for workers who had filed injury claims and had caused trouble. Deep within the archives, she found a file for a man named George Metesky. The details were a perfect match. Metesky was a former employee who had been injured in a plant accident in 1931. His workers' compensation claim had been denied, and for years he had written furious, rambling letters to the company, his union, and local politicians. The language in those old letters was identical to the letters from the Mad Bomber. He lived in Waterbury, Connecticut. On the night of January 21, 1957, 16 years after the first bomb was planted, police arrived at George Metesky's home. They knocked on the door, and a quiet, unassuming 54-year-old man in his pajamas answered. It was him. He calmly admitted to being the bomber, telling officers, "I know why you're here. You're here about the bombs." The police asked him to get dressed and come with them. Metesky went to his bedroom to change. A few moments later, he emerged into the living room to face the arresting officers. He was wearing a double-breasted suit, and it was neatly buttoned, just as Dr. Brussel had predicted. The ghost had been given a face, and the profile was validated in the most spectacular way possible. The aftermath was immediate. In Metesky's garage, police found a workshop. It was meticulously organized, with all the tools and materials needed to construct his pipe bombs laid out in perfect order. His home was neat and tidy. He lived there with his two older, unmarried sisters. Every single detail of Dr. Brussel's profile had been correct. George Metesky was not a monster in the conventional sense. He was a quiet, polite, deeply unwell man, consumed by a grievance that had festered for decades. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, deemed legally insane, and therefore unfit to stand trial for his crimes, which included planting over 30 bombs and injuring 15 people. He was committed to the Madiwan Hospital for the Criminally Insane, where he remained a model patient until his release in 1973. He had served more time than he would have if he had been convicted and sentenced. He returned to his home in Waterbury, where he lived quietly until his death in 1994. The trial of George Metesky never happened, but the impact of his case on law enforcement was revolutionary. Dr. Brussel's incredible success proved that the principles of psychology could be a powerful weapon in criminal investigation. He had shown that you could deduce a person's habits, their living situation, and even their style of dress from the psychological residue they left at a crime scene. This case became the foundational text for the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, which was formed years later. Agents like John Douglas and Robert Ressler would build upon Brussel's work, systematizing the process of criminal profiling and applying it to hunt serial killers, arsonists, and other violent offenders who seem to kill without motive. The profile of the Mad Bomber taught investigators to look beyond the what of a crime and to focus on the why. Why did the bomber use block letters? To disguise his handwriting, but also a sign of emotional regression. Why were the bombs so well made? Because his craft was his source of pride, a way to prove he was intelligent and not the failure Con Ed made him out to be. Every detail of the crime was a message from the offender. The act of leaving a bomb in a theater wasn't just random. It was a way of disrupting society, of making the public feel the same anxiety and fear that he felt every day. Profiling became the art of learning to read that violent, coded language. The technique is not infallible, of course. It has been criticized for being more of an art than a science, and poorly constructed profiles have led investigations astray. It relies on inference and educated guesswork, and it cannot replace traditional police work. But it provides something essential when all other leads have run dry: a direction. Before this case, investigators were looking for a faceless criminal. After Dr. Brussel, they were looking for George Metesky. They just didn't know his name yet. He gave them a tangible person to search for, transforming an impossible task into a manageable one. He turned a phantom into a flesh and blood suspect. The legacy of the Mad Bomber is not just the fear he created, but the revolution in policing that he inadvertently caused. His 16-year reign of terror forced law enforcement to look into the abyss of a criminal's mind, and in doing so, they found a new way to fight the darkness. The case exposed the reality that some crimes are not motivated by greed, lust, or simple anger. They are born from broken minds, from grievances that warp and metastasize over time into a private, all-consuming war against the world. Metesky was not bombing buildings. He was bombing the symbol of his own perceived failure and injustice. This investigation changed the very questions detectives asked. They began to consider the offender's behavior at the scene. Was the crime organized or disorganized? Was there an attempt to communicate? What did the level of violence say about the killer's emotional state? These questions are now standard practice, a direct result of the Metesky case. Today, criminal profiling is a staple of true crime documentaries and television shows, but it's easy to forget its humble, desperate origins. It was born from a 16-year-long failure, from a police force that was out of options, and from a psychiatrist who believed that no human action is truly random. George Metesky's FP signature was eventually revealed to stand for fair play, a tragically ironic name for a man who felt he had been treated unfairly his entire life. It was the final piece of the psychological puzzle, a signature that encapsulated his entire warped motivation in two simple letters. The story of the Mad Bomber is more than just a manhunt. It is the story of how law enforcement learned to read the invisible ink of human psychology, to follow the breadcrumbs of a fractured personality back to its source. It proved that sometimes the most important clues are not what the criminal leaves behind, but who the criminal is. And so we are left with a final, chilling question. If our actions, our words, and even the clothes we choose to wear are a reflection of our deepest selves, what psychological fingerprints are each of us leaving behind every single day? And in the right hands, what story would they tell?